Let us pray. Loving and faithful God, we give you thanks for this word, and we pray that you can give us insight and understanding by your Holy Spirit speaking in Scripture today. In Jesus' name, amen. This morning we have this wonderful story of the feeding of the 5,000. It's one of these really familiar stories, but there's just so much here. So this takes place in Mark's telling. Anyway, it takes place at Mark chapter 6, verses 30 to 44. And it just starts with this line of the apostles gathering around Jesus. It says they gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. So right away, we know we've got to look a little bit back. If you go back to the beginning of chapter 6, you find that this story we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where Jesus sent his disciples out, naming them apostles. Apostles just means sent ones. So he sent them out into the surrounding villages to teach and to heal people. And now they've come back. They're coming back and they're giving a report to Jesus about all that they had done and all that they had taught. So that's what's happening. Disciples sent out, now they've returned. And Jesus says to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." And that's just great. So they've been really busy, and now they're going to get some rest off on their own. Something that we all need, and sounds really good to lots of us to go off and have some time away for rest. It's actually a good summer reading, isn't it, for us? But then we get this little line, and many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. Many were coming and going. So we have to have this picture. It's actually not just the apostles that gathered around Jesus, so not just these 12 that he sent out and now they've come back. That's happened, but there's many other people. There's all kinds of people around coming and going, as in maybe coming and going to Jesus and encountering him, maybe being healed by him, wanting something. And the disciples just come back, they give their little report, but they're thrust right back into the work that is coming with this surrounding popularity of Jesus and people always coming to him. They now have work to do and they have no leisure. So Jesus wants to take them away from that and saying, let's go and rest for a while off on our own because they have no leisure. Now this word, leisure, is an interesting Greek word. It's eukaireo. And it's made really of two words. If you saw it, you would see eu is EU, which is a prefix that just means good. Like it's where we get the word euphoria from, right? So it means good or wonderful. And kaireo is actually the word, it's from the root kairos, if you've heard that word. It's a Greek word that means time, but it's a different kind of time. Greek has, if you know anything about this, you'll know that there's two main words to talk about time in Greek, chronos and kairos. And chronos is just the chronological, where we get the word chronological, flow of time, so just time just going on and on and on. It's counting the seconds. And kairos is time in a different sense. It's like this word actually can mean leisure, which is kind of like kairos time. Like I know when I've been at the lake this week, and that's like kairos time. We're not counting the seconds. We're just enjoying the time. But it can also mean opportunity, right? At just the right time, right? We have those same ways of talking about time, but in Greek, those get separated into two different words. So eukaireo literally means to have good time. Not to have a good time necessarily, but to have good time or to be at the right moment. So here it's translated leisure, but it could also be opportunity, right, is another way of looking at that. And this word, this specific word, eukaireo, it actually appears in another place in Mark chapter 6, and it doesn't really appear in many other places in the Bible, in the story right before this one. So there's this sending of the apostles, there's this story, the feeding of the 5,000, and sandwiched in between these two by Mark is what I always thought was a really strange story. It's the story of John the Baptist being beheaded. And it's a really horrible story. And it's right here in between the disciples going out and sharing the word and then coming back and giving this report and then the feeding of the 5,000 happening. It's this weird story where this word euchaireo shows up. Now, if you know the story of how John the Baptist was killed, he was being held essentially as a political prisoner by King Herod. And King Herod's having a birthday party for himself, big banquet, and lots of food, and all of these nobility and officials are all gathered together. And the daughter of Herodias, Herod's wife, comes and dances as entertainment at this party. And we read that Herod was pleased by her and says, "I will offer you anything up to half my kingdom." And she goes off and talks to her mother, and her mother, who, we won't go into the reasons of why she hated John the Baptist, but basically she did. John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin, the one who baptized Jesus. She says, "Ask for the head of John the Baptist." And she goes back to Herod and says, "I want the head of John the Baptist on a platter." And we read that Herod regrets this because he sort of kind of liked John and some of the things he said, apparently. But he doesn't want to look bad in front of his guests because he said that he would give her anything, and this is what she asked for. So he goes ahead and orders the execution of John the Baptist, and that's exactly what happens. And then we get the story that we have today. Now, the word euchaireo appears in this John the Baptist story, and it's translated as opportunity, and it's to do with the opportune time that Herodias has for this opportunity to have John killed. It's really strange, these connections between these two, because there are connections. So we read in the feeding of the 5,000, so bear with me here, we're going somewhere with this connection to this strange story, and what I always thought was a really strange placement. Also, it's a long story for Mark. I've just kind of recapped it a little bit. There's lots of detail, and Mark is the shortest gospel, so why devote so much detail to this story that doesn't necessarily seem like it's part of the main plot? But there's something going on in this story before the feeding of the 5,000. In a way, we could see these two moments as kairos moments, as timely. They're actually both the banquet of Herod and the meal that Jesus does. They're both meals. And in the first one, we see the decadence of Herod's banquet. And in Herod's banquet, we have power, corruption, and we have revenge. And there's this dance which moves a leader to say, "I will give you anything, even up to half my kingdom." That's the setup in that story. But now let's take a look at this feeding of the 5,000 story. So we read that they did go away in a boat to a deserted place by themselves. So they get in a boat and they escape the crowds. But we also then read, many of them going recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. So they see them going across a lake, and all of the people see that, and they manage to run around the lake and get there faster than the boat arrives. So in other words, they are not going to get their promised rest. Now, as Jesus went ashore, we read he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. So here is the root of what Jesus is up to. He has compassion. He is so different from Herod, from the other king. He sees them and they are like sheep without a shepherd. They're without a leader that cares, that truly cares for all the people. When it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place. So all these people are here and we're nowhere near anything. And the hour is now very late. So send them away so that they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy something for themselves to eat." Now, let's remember that people managed to run ahead of them and get there before them. So this is not an unreasonable suggestion. This is perfectly reasonable for the disciples to say, look, there's villages close by. We're in a deserted place, but they can just go back to those villages where we just were, and they can go and buy some food. They're hungry. But why not say to Jesus, send them back to their homes so that they can eat something that they already have? I wonder if Mark inserted this idea of buying something for themselves to eat for a purpose. Why put buy in there? Why make that a focal point? Maybe it's because this is exactly how the world works. When you want something to eat, you have to buy it in the end. It's all about keeping the economy going. If you want to eat, you got to make money to buy your food. Unless, of course, you are nobility. Unless you're one of those people who was eating at Herod's party. Unless you please the king and can ask for things like the head of a dissident and prophet on a platter, because the platter's not really needed for food anymore because everyone is so full. Those people don't need to work hard and buy their daily bread, but everyone else does. The massive majority, they have to. Go and buy your food is exactly the way things work, the way we assume it is supposed to be in the world. You earn your way, you earn your food, you take care of yourself and your own. That's Herod's kingdom. That's the kingdom of the world. It's a world where there is actually deep inequity. A loaf of bread is basically the same price for everyone, and that actually seems fair. But is it fair when there are people who can't even afford that, and just down the road there is deep decadence and waste? We live in that same world. Also, I want us to examine the real motivation of the disciples here. Are they actually concerned about the people being hungry because it's late? If you were there and you were hungry and it was a late hour, wouldn't you just leave and go find some food? It's actually the disciples that are exhausted and do not have leisure even to eat. They're the ones who are hungry, and so they go to Jesus and say, why don't you just get rid of all these people and tell them to go and get something to eat? You know what? They can come back. See, they are actually not motivated by compassion for the people that they see. And nor is this actually about having healthy boundaries and limits. This story is not about that. We have other stories where we get tons of stories about Jesus going off on his own all the time and not being interrupted and having time alone to refresh. So that's still important. So it's not about that. The people who are there sought Jesus out, and Jesus is full of compassion and just wants to let them stay. It's much more likely that it is the disciples that are the hungry ones and the tired ones, and they're complaining about that. But notice how they complain. They don't go to Jesus with, you know what, Jesus, like, we're exhausted. We're really tired. Instead, you know what they do with him? They play a game. Jesus, it's late and everyone's hungry, so you should send them away to buy something for themselves to eat. Send them away. This is classic. This is, instead of getting in touch with how we actually feel and what we actually need, we say something like, you know, people don't really like it when, that's code for, I'm really upset by this thing. Or we say things like, you know, I've heard that people want this to change. I've heard that people are upset. The disciples are coming. We've heard that people are hungry. and it's late. But notice how Jesus doesn't play along. He just says, you feed them, or you give them something to eat. And they come back to Jesus and said, are we supposed to go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? Denarii is a day wage for a laborer. So if we're going to base that, say, on minimum wage, the math will work out to about $2,400. So like even today, like that would be challenging, right? Where are we going to find $2,400 to feed everybody? That's what they're saying. But Jesus is just not playing their game. He calls them on it. He takes what they say at face value. He says, if people are so hungry, you go and feed them. And the disciples just say, what are you talking about? Where are we going to get all of that money? And in some ways, this is a bit of a classic church or community meeting that we hear all the time. We've heard that people are really upset about X, Y, and Z. Imagine if Jesus was at that meeting. He would just say, well, do something about it then, if that's what you've heard. And you know what the first response almost always is, but what about the budget? Where are we going to get the funds for that? That's exactly what's going on in this conversation. And so then Jesus leads them to learn. He says to them, how many loaves have you? Go and see. And when they had found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. So you notice that the first thing Jesus does is he challenges the unspoken assumption that they literally have nothing to work with. Because as soon as we say things like, well, where are we going to find the money for that? Or what's the budget? How can we do this with the budget? What we're kind of saying is we have nothing. And that's rarely true. So Jesus challenges the unspoken assumption that they have nothing to work with. At the meeting where we wonder about where the money will come from, when do we actually take a hard look at what we do have and ask what possibility is present? How much do you actually have? Jesus asks. Go and see. That's the first step. Go and see how much you actually have. Take a look at it. Make an assessment. They come back and they say, 5 loaves, 2 fish. I wish the text actually said, oh, we only have 5 loaves and 2 fish, because that's how I imagine the disciples, right? There's 5,000 men plus women plus children. We only have 5 loaves and 2 fish. But Jesus just seems to say, okay, well, great. Now we've done that assessment. That's what we've got. Then Jesus ordered them to get all of the people to sit down in groups on the green grass, it says. He ordered his disciples to get the people to do this. It's interesting that when Jesus was teaching this massive crowd, because all these people came and it said he was teaching them, it never tells us that he had any trouble being heard. Jesus somehow is able to project his voice so that this giant crowd can hear his teaching, but here he does not address the crowd directly. Instead, he orders his disciples to get the people to sit down in groups. He is instructing his closest followers, right? They have brought a problem to Jesus. Everyone's hungry and it's late. And Jesus is then walking them through the solution. First thing, assess how much you have. Now, next thing, get everyone to sit down in groups. I mean, this is just a good way to solve any problem. If you have like 5,000 men plus women and children, let's get everyone into smaller groups than that, first of all. How about groups? Let's do that. I think one of the best things we did as a church this past year is make small groups, is ask people to come together in small groups and be together. Not just to solve a problem, but to be together. But it is a great way to tackle things. Don't tackle things as the giant thing. Tackle it as the small group. And so they sat down in groups of hundreds and of 50s, we read. And then we read, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. Jesus, I want you to notice that Jesus actually doesn't multiply anything here in these verses. It tells us that he divided up what there was between the disciples to set before the people. The people are hungry. Okay, so go feed them with these 5 loaves and 2 fish that you found. With this, here you go. And I can just imagine the disciples with this. We can't go with just this. We need to develop more resources. We need to figure out the whole plan. We can't go now with just this. But they do. They listen to Jesus and they follow through on what he's asked them to do. And then we get the final verses of the feeding of the 5,000 in Mark's gospel. It says, and all ate and were filled. That's verse 42. Verse 43. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And verse 44, those who had eaten the loaves numbered 5,000 men. And we're left wondering, wow, where is the miracle? All we find are these disciples who get sent out by Jesus with 5 loaves and 2 fish divided up amongst themselves to go and serve these groups of 50 and groups of 100 of 5,000 men plus the women plus the children. And everyone eats everything they want and are filled, and there's 12 baskets of leftovers. Somehow the multiplication of the food that Jesus did, this incredible miracle, somehow that happens in the midst of the distribution and not before. I always think this actually takes enormous trust on the part of the disciples. They are sent with 5 loaves and 2 fish, divided among them, and I can just imagine them approaching that first group of 50 even. Let's not take the larger 100, let's just take the 50. And they must be thinking, we can't even feed this one group. But somehow, miraculously, there is enough, and not just enough, more than enough. 12 baskets of leftovers after everyone has had their fill, it says. Now, like all Jesus' stories, there is far more here than we can ever talk about, probably in a lifetime. But one thing is that this is actually a story about 2 kingdoms, 2 ways of being in the world. One is a kingdom of decadence, while the other one is a kingdom of abundance, right? There's a difference between those 2 things. One is a kingdom of inequity, and the other is a kingdom of justice. One is a kingdom of power and corruption and revenge, and the other is a kingdom of compassion and trust. In Herod's kingdom, there is a banquet and there is ample food, it says. In fact, there are platters of it, even platters going to waste, ones that they can sweep off and put a head on it. And that banquet is to celebrate the king's birthday. It's in honor of him. And there's this dance that pleases him. He offers up to half his kingdom, and the night ends with revenge and the head of a prophet on a platter. God's people are served up as dessert. And I'm sure several of the guests were horrified, but I bet others were perhaps mildly entertained by this. In Herod's kingdom, people are objectified. The daughter of Herodias who dances, John and his head on a platter, and even Herod himself, who decided that the best thing to do was to stick to his oath. And so he has a man killed, and his main motivation is just to not look bad in front of his birthday party guests. Their whole life in this kingdom is corrupt, and it's at a party to honor the man at the head of it, while the regular people are working hard just to put some food on their table. But God's kingdom is completely different. At first glance, there never seems to be enough to go around. And maybe that's because God's kingdom is actually working best in places where, by the world's standards, there isn't enough. And so, as people who follow Jesus, we become tempted to turn people away because of apparent lack of resources and also our own tiredness. There's a temptation to give up. But we don't give up because we aren't in it for ourselves, like those in Herod's kingdom. And so we go to Jesus as the disciples did, and with him, we learn once again that the driving force is not about power or glory or revenge. It is compassion. And somehow, miraculously, in the midst of our activity, as we take steps in trusting God, there is more than enough. The resources in God's kingdom, it turns out, though at first glance they seem meager, they are not scarce, and no one is ever sent away. The food at Christ's table, as the people sit in groups of 50 or 100 or less or more, that food is completely free, and it overflows with abundance. Amen.